If you're concerned about the future of your organization when you step down, then Where Will the Mantle Fall? A biblical and legal guide to succession planning is a must-read for you. It delves into the scriptural and legal aspect of succession planning, characteristics of successors, the people, the process, church bylaws, common myths, even issues with nepotism. Where Will the Mantle Fall? Written by Richmond's own attorney, Pastor Travell Travis, and available at Amazon.com. Looking to start a church, business, or nonprofit organization in 2021? Do you need help forming an LLC, applying for a copyright or trademark, revising church bylaws, crafting a succession plan, or developing a compensation package for your pastor and staff? Contact the law office of Travell Travis, a Richmond-based legal boutique focused on the needs of pastors, entrepreneurs, creatives, and our community. Let's make your vision a reality in 2021. Visit TravellTravis.com. That's TRAVELL Travis.com.
Good morning, everyone. I'm asking everyone to please like, share, comment, and tag. It's been a while since we've come to you with a legal lesson, but we're excited to share this information with you today. So if you're a pastor, church leader, church member, entrepreneur, member of the community, I'm inviting you to like, to share, to tag, to comment, let someone know that this legal lesson is airing live right now, and we're going to talk about the question whether or not a church can require its members to be vaccinated. So I want to welcome you to the Facebook fan page and the YouTube channel of the Law Office of Travell Travis. Our firm focuses on the needs of pastors, entrepreneurs, creatives, and the community. We invite you to connect with us on our website, TravellTravis.com, by telephone, area code 757-528-8529, email travelltravis@gmail.com, as well as on social media. You can connect with us, the Law Office of Travell Travis, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. We invite you to even subscribe to our YouTube channel, as we have a series of legal lessons that are archived on our YouTube channel. And so today, as a disclaimer, our videos are for educational and advertising purposes. It is not a substitute for consulting a licensed attorney in your home state. Also, once again, we invite you, if you know a pastor or a leader, an entrepreneur, tag them in the comments, share this on their page, inbox them, send them the link to YouTube for this information that we hope to share with you on today. As many churches are preparing for services on tomorrow, we're also in what's considered convocation season, convocation and conventions and councils and conferences. Some are reopening. Some churches are reopening for the first time in over a year, and others are considering modified protocols. And in those mandated or revised protocols, or in those protocols to reopen, some have mandated that the members receive the vaccine, the COVID-19, specifically COVID-19 vaccine, and are required to disclose that information and even provide proof or evidence that they have indeed been vaccinated, not just on your honor, trusting that you're going to be honest with your disclosure. To attend services, or alternatively, perhaps remove restrictions such as mask, temperature checks, seating, or serving various ways in church or in worship service. So we have different ones who are considering a vaccine mandate, requiring some type of mandatory disclosure of that vaccine, whether it is a precondition to reopening or a condition to perhaps relieving restrictions or reducing restrictions in terms of how the church operates and those who can serve. The short answer to this question is yes. The short answer to this question is yes. Can my church require me to get vaccinated The short answer to that is yes. A church can require vaccination, disclosure, and require proof or evidence of vaccination status. It's no different than if you were to come to my home and I mandate vaccination. If I were having a private event, a wedding, or some type of graduation party or family reunion, I can mandate that. Some of you have begun to travel. You encountered travel restrictions that require some type of mandate or proof of either a clean test in terms of COVID-19 testing or some evidence of vaccination. Generally speaking, it is not discriminatory to require this, to require the vaccine, or to require the disclosure of that information. Some have raised concerns over whether or not requiring the vaccine and disclosure, if it violates what is called HIPAA laws, HIPAA. And HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It is a federal law concerning the privacy of health information. In general, HIPAA covers healthcare providers and healthcare transactions. Thus, usually, unless a church is operating a clinic, an ongoing clinic, or is perhaps providing health insurance for its employees, then it's very unlikely that a church or church activities would be considered a HIPAA violation, or a healthcare provider or a healthcare transaction. Even if churches that are testing centers or vaccination sites, arguably providing some type of health service, would not count, either because the health professionals are doing the testing and the vaccinating. The church is merely a facility or venue to use for such activity. So if you're a testing site or a vaccination site, it's not that the members are doing the testing and the vaccinating. Is normally the local health department that's just setting up shop at your church in order to do so. And so they would fall under perhaps HIPAA requirements, but the church would not necessarily fall under HIPAA. And that's very important because people throw around HIPAA, HIPAA this, HIPAA that, HIPAA this. And the reality is HIPAA really primarily applies to healthcare professionals, healthcare providers, and healthcare transactions. And so a church doing the business of a church generally would not fall under the HIPAA provisions of privacy and disclosure. Now, the question is, what about doctors, nurses, medical professionals in the church we consult or use to monitor or collect information? Will that violate HIPAA? And while they are healthcare workers engaged in perhaps a healthcare activity, according to the law, if doing it as a member of the church is not engaged in providing health care, nor would this activity in of itself be considered a covered transaction or a healthcare transaction. If by some chance your healthcare professionals in your congregation are afraid that that their privacy requirements is mobile and that it kind of goes with them wherever they are, wherever they're engaged in, healthcare or providing healthcare, then it may be recommended that you use non-healthcare professionals in terms of perhaps collecting the information, the vaccination information, if that is a concern for your church. The second question then becomes, is it discriminatory? Are you discriminating against me by requiring me to get the vaccination? Are you discriminating against me? I can't come to church because I don't have the vaccine. That's unfair. Is that discrimination? Generally speaking, a private entity can have requirements so long as it's not discriminatory. And legal discrimination normally falls under categories of religious discrimination, race, age, gender, disability, and religion. But in many cases, there are also religious exemptions even to discrimination laws. So a lot of your churches don't even fall under the general discrimination laws that many businesses and other institutions are required to follow. Just as a church may have a mask mandate, temperature check mandate, symptoms check, some churches have a tire. You can't wear certain things. You can't wear shorts to church during the summer, or you can't wear baseball caps during service, or you have to wear a head covering, or some churches require women to wear certain things or not wear certain things during service. And so those would not violate or infringe any type of discrimination. So nor would the vaccine in terms of mandating those who enter the sanctuary or participate in the worship service be vaccinated. So the question is, well, what about my right to privacy? We hear about it. I have a right to privacy. No one has the right to know my business. What I do and don't do, that's up to me and God, and no one else has the right to know. That's too much information for them. But understand, it's not necessarily a violation of privacy to be required to disclose as a precondition to entering or serving in the church. Now, there may be some concerns over, Sister Watermelon is known to kind of share information, have a loose lip. And so you want to be careful that those who collect the information are trustworthy, can remain confidentiality, so that the information is not disseminated beyond perhaps the predetermined group that would handle the information. That's no different than perhaps your financial information in your church. If you have tithers and those who give offerings, you have your financial team that knows who's tithing and who's not. Everybody in the church should know who is and who's not tithing, or how much they're tithing, or how little they're tithing. So there would be a certain level of trust and credibility to make sure that the people who have this information isn't just loose with it and sharing this information without any type of confidential, respective confidentiality. When we talk about constitutional privacy, right to privacy under the Constitution, that's dealing with the government, protects citizens from intrusions by the government, not necessarily private citizens or private businesses. So thus, ultimately, when dealing with the question of privacy, one has a choice to disclose. If you don't want to disclose, you have the right not to disclose, and therefore you have the right not to attend the worship service. Okay, so thus, ultimately, one has a choice to disclose or not to disclose vaccination status, but understand that the church has the right to deny entry or participation for failing to be vaccinated, or to disclose vaccination, and to provide credible proof of vaccination if it's beyond just simply taking your word for it. The private concerns, as I mentioned earlier, would be more in the context of who has access to the information, how was the information handled or mishandled, and did someone suffer harm because the information was mishandled or used improperly to harm someone. So once again, we know who is vaccinated, we know who's not vaccinated. So are those people, somehow the information gets out and now those people are targeted? They are ridiculed, especially maybe from the pulpit or in meetings. I don't know what's wrong with y'all. Are they somehow belittled or ostracized? So I gave you private information that was only supposed to be for a limited group of people. Now it has gotten out, and now you're using this information, to beat me up over. That could be perhaps, a privacy concern that the church may want to be considerate of, especially if that person suffers some type of recognizable legal harm because of that information being leaked or divulged. Somehow the whole church now knows, not because of your own admission or statements. Now, that's important as well. You haven't disclosed to anybody whether you have or have not, only in the context of informing your church. And now everybody knows. Well, okay, I trusted you with this confidential information, whether I have or have not. Now, why does everyone know it? And the only way it got out is because I disclosed that information to the church. But now in the era of social media, most people have, even taken pictures, whether they have or have not, or made statements as to whether they are or not. So those that would be in a different category. But in an instance where a person has not said one way or the other, and they comply with the church's requirement, and then somehow it gets out, that may be problematic to the church. Also, without the individual's knowledge, permission, consent, or further without one's permission, now this person is getting harassing phone calls, emails, text messages, get vaccinated, get vaccinated. That these teams that will be going to houses now know to come to your house because the church has now told somebody that you need to go to Sister Cantaloupe's house because she has not received the vaccination. That also could be not a HIPAA violation, but perhaps maybe a breach of trust, breach of confidentiality, maybe some type of privacy, because you made a certain statements that it would only be used in a limited purpose by limited people, and now it's being used by a broader audience or for a different purpose for which it was originally intended. So with that said, I want to shift from can my church require vaccination and disclosure, which the short answer is yes, to the question of should they require vaccination? And so I want you, if you can, like, share, comment, tag somebody. If you know a pastor, maybe your leader is contemplating, maybe there's a conversation that within your church, within your leadership team, within your Reformation. I appreciate Brother Barnes, vaccination evangelist. That's a new term. I think they'd be interested to see. So I want to present 5 quick questions for you to consider before mandating the vaccine and mandating disclosure and the type of disclosure that you would want members of your congregation to adhere to. Some churches, number one, who will collect the information? Number one, who will collect the information? Who will have access? How will this information be stored? How will this information be used? Is it anonymous or is proof required? If so, what type of proof? Vaccination cards vary depending on the vaccination site. So will someone provide this information and then someone said, well, that's not a legit form of vaccination proof? And so then you get into this whole type of information. Some churches have done anonymous surveys, and I can share our church. We did an anonymous survey just to kind of gauge how many people had been vaccinated, not to know specifically who, but just to get an idea of how many people had been vaccinated, because questions were starting to emerge as to whether or not some of the restrictions could be eased if a certain number of people had been vaccinated. And so we asked that question in terms of the adults that have been vaccinated, as well as the overall congregation, to kind of get an idea of where we stood. And we're monitoring that to perhaps get an idea of maybe if and when some of our restrictions could be eased in our congregation. Okay, so there's different ways of obtaining information. There's different ways to use the information, even in terms of wanting to know whether or not people in your congregation have or have not been vaccinated. So number one, who will collect the information? Number two, will people have legal or medical or religious exceptions? There is a recognition for those who have medical exceptions. There is an exception for those who have legal exceptions. And right now, those under the age of 12 can't be vaccinated. And then there's also religious exceptions, which may be a little bit more problematic, because if it's a church and we believe the same thing, it may be a little bit harder to assert a religious exception when we arguably of the same faith. But it may be important for a church to issue a statement or have a Bible study or provide information as to where the church stands on the issue of vaccination. There's a lot of theological views and understandings of what the vaccine could mean and could not mean as it relates to one's faith and beliefs in the church. And so it might be important to make a statement that, hey, from the church standpoint, it's your choice, or we do believe in it or we don't believe in it, so that a person can't say, well, I'm using a religious exception. That may work at a university, that may work in the school system, that may work at a private employer, but it may be a little bit more problematic when it comes to the church. But we do appreciate that there are those who have legitimate medical reasons. And one of the things that you have to be careful of, if a person asserts a medical reason, do people then want to fish and dig and find out, well, what is the medical reason? And then that could lead to someone else. Maybe someone has a undisclosed illness, a pre-existing condition, something that they've dealt with and people do not know. And so now once they have asserted that medical condition or medical exception, will people then be more curious or nosy, if you will, to find out, well, what is it, and want to investigate? And then that now raises a whole level of concern within the congregation. All right, so number one, who will collect the information? Number two, will people have legal, medical, or religious exceptions that have to be recognized? Number three, how will your congregation feel about the mandate? How will your congregation feel about the mandate and the disclosure? And honestly, this will vary from perhaps one congregation to the next. This may be impacted by the overall vaccination rate in your community, the demographics of your church, the size of your church. It also may be impacted by COVID experiences within your congregation. Have people experience COVID-19? Have they had loved ones to experience COVID-19? Have there been any deaths in the church, or have members of the church experienced death as a result of COVID-19? Was there an outbreak in your congregation, whether it was linked to a church service or just a significant amount of people in your congregation received COVID? The question then becomes, will that impact their view on whether to be vaccinated or not? And so you may have an instance where someone's saying, I will not come because they're mandating vaccine. And then you may also have others who say, I will not come unless they do mandate vaccines. And so I think it's important for a pastor and leaders to also kind of have a sense of how the congregation may feel on the subject, because in the end, if the congregation doesn't have buy-in, they'll either stay home or go to another church. So just be aware that I think there has to be a certain way of gauging the overall feeling of the congregation as it relates to this particular important topic, and being sensitive to that in your decision-making process. Number four, how has your church operated during the pandemic? I think this is very important. How has your church operated during the pandemic? So a couple examples. Maybe you're a church that never had restrictions. Even when the government had restrictions, you didn't have any social distancing requirements. You didn't have any temperature checks or symptom checks or mask requirements. All this time, you've been open and functioning and having service for the entire 18 months without any restrictions. Then why now impose a vaccine requirement or disclosure of that? That would be somewhat eye-raising, perhaps, to some of your congregations. So, if it hasn't mattered before, why does it matter now? Second, perhaps category of churches would be, have you been open and operating with restrictions, and now you perhaps want to remove or reduce those restrictions? Okay, so you've been open, and so now you're saying, okay, we've been doing the minimum amount of service, face masks, social distancing. We've eliminated certain programs and ministries in the church. Now, can we perhaps change some of those policies and protocols if we know that most, if not all, of our congregation has or has not been vaccinated. And so once again, you start thinking about your activities can resume, maybe your nursery, your children's church. Can we resume church transportation, picking up people, bringing them to church? Can we resume baptisms, altar calls, prayer lines? Can we resume having a choir again, in-person choir rehearsals? Can we have church dinners and banquets again? So you've been open with restrictions, but want to resume or return to some of your other normal or regular activities. And so even with that, there may be a consideration of, do you require key leaders, your choir members, your praise team leaders, your musicians, your ushers, your greeters, your nursery workers, your church transportation providers, those who are perhaps in direct contact with others, to say, hey, for your safety, we're going to require vaccination, because you're arguably, even though volunteer, staff, you're an employee, and we want to make the congregation feel at ease, and we want to also protect your safety as we somewhat resume or ease back into some of these normal or routine activities of the church. A third category is perhaps you've been closed this entire time. There are many churches that have been closed for the entire 18 months or have only had outdoor service. And so now there's a desire to either re-enter the church or just resume having in-person worship service. And it has always been stated that the precondition to returning to in-person or returning to in the sanctuary was either the COVID numbers going down, or as many have said throughout the pandemic, until there is a vaccine that works. And so if that has been the requirement all the time, now it is perhaps, feasible or understandable for a church to say, we've said this the whole time. The vaccine has now been out for 7 months. We're ready to move back in. Maybe it's too hot because it's summertime, or you're seeing the fall is going to be too cold, and we're ready to go back to in-person worship. We've already told you that what we were looking for is vaccinations. And now that the vaccination is widely available and it seems to be working, now we want to move back in. And as a precondition, we want all of our members to be vaccinated. And we want to know with some degree of certainty, not just taking your word for it, that you have been vaccinated. And then there's a fourth category of churches that I want to add. Are you just a pro-vaccine church, and you want to use this information to encourage others to get vaccinated? It could be that you feel that it's your duty or obligation to somehow encourage your members to get vaccinated. You feel that maybe requiring this as a precondition would actually encourage some to get it who've been hesitant or reluctant along the way. And then fifth question you want to consider, once again, I'm going to invite you to like, share, tag, comment with someone. What would be the impact of the policy? What would be the impact of the policy on your congregation? Will the policy create unnecessary division, or would it create dialogue? Will people be arguing over, the policy, or why you don't have the vaccine, or why you do have the vaccine? Or will it actually encourage or foster healthy dialogue? What is your hesitation? What is your reluctance? What was your experience like? And so it could go complete disaster in terms of creating division and hostility in your church. On the other hand, it could create healthy dialogue, discussion, and understanding within the church. Will there be a level of dishonesty, especially if you have I'll take your word for it policy, and people are tired of wearing a mask and they know they're not necessarily excited about taking the vaccine? Well, people just lie. And you would think as a church that shouldn't happen. But could it be that some people will be dishonest because they want to come to church, but they don't want to be ostracized or labeled or required to wear a mask any longer? Or degree of freedom not experienced in the last 18 months. And so everybody's like, man, if everybody just gets this, we can actually go back to having church, with a certain level of normalcy that we have not had in the last 18 months. And as I said earlier, will your vaccination policy cause people to stay home, or will your vaccine policy actually make people feel more comfortable in attending service? Understand, based on current data, it isn't vaccinated people really who are at risk because of the unvaccinated, but unvaccinated are at risk from other unvaccinated people. So number one, who will collect the information? How will the information be used? Number two, will people have legal, medical, religious exceptions to where you have a significant portion of the people who will not be vaccinated? And then what? Number three, how will your congregation feel about or their level of reception to being vaccinated? Number four, how has your church operated during the pandemic, and how will this policy coincide with that policy or contradict that policy? And then number five, what would be the overall impact of the policy on your congregation? In closing, and once again, I'm asking you to like, to share, to comment, to tag. Number one, can my church require vaccination? The answer, simply put, is yes. Number two, can my church require disclosure of vaccination status? And the answer is yes. Is it a HIPAA violation for the church to ask this information or have this information? No, it is not a HIPAA violation for a church to require vaccination and to require disclosing of one's vaccination status, even as a precondition to serving in the church or attending service in that particular congregation. Number four, can the church require it for employees? Yes, the church can require employees, whether paid or unpaid, volunteers or staff, that they be vaccinated as a precondition to returning to serving in various capacities. But once again, you have to be mindful of the exemptions for medical, religious, or legal exemptions. In closing, to pastors and leaders, it's important, number one, to know the law, especially the law in your state. Know the law, especially the law in your state and even in your community. I think in the news yesterday, Los Angeles County has reinstated its mask mandate. So even though things are changing, they're still changing. And so it's important for churches to be aware constantly of what's going on at the federal level, state level, local level, even global level, as well as in your congregation. Also be aware of any state privacy laws. For example, Virginia has a privacy law that's related to businesses, but then nonprofits and universities are exempt. So your state may have some type of privacy law that is in addition to HIPAA that may impact what your church can or cannot do as it relates to the vaccination. Number two, we said know your congregation. Number three, know God's voice and his direction in this season, recognizing that what works for one congregation may not work for your congregation. And so just a one size fits all, I think we've seen throughout this pandemic, different churches have handled it different ways. And so I think the same thing would apply to a vaccine and a vaccine disclosure mandate for one's congregation. Once again, I want to thank you for viewing this legal lesson 26, sponsored by the Law Office of Travell Travis. We invite you to like, to share, to comment, to take the link, share with your pastor, with your leaders, with other pastors in your community or in your reformation or denomination. As stated earlier, our legal lessons are for educational advertising purposes. It is not a substitute for consulting a licensed attorney in your state. If your church is contemplating a vaccination policy for employees or members of the congregation, our law office is available to assist you or consult with you regarding such vaccination policy. Our contact information, once again, you can call us at area code 757-528-8529. You can also visit our website, travelltravis.com. You can email us at travelltravis@gmail.com. You can also contact us on social media, Facebook, our fan page, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, as well as view our other legal lessons on our YouTube channel. Once again, we are praying for you. We're praying for our globe. We're praying for our country. We're praying for our states and local leaders. We're praying for our church and church leaders. And so we pray God's blessings upon you. May God bless you. Heaven smile upon you is our prayer. Good afternoon and God bless.
Looking to start a church, business, or nonprofit organization in 2021? Do you need help forming an LLC, applying for a copyright or trademark, revising church bylaws, crafting a succession plan, or developing a compensation package for your pastor and staff? Contact the law office of Travell Travis, a Richmond-based legal boutique focused on the needs of pastors, entrepreneurs, creatives in our community. Let's make your vision a reality in 2021. Visit TravellTravis.com. That's TRAVELL Travis.com. If you're concerned about the future of your organization when you step down, then Where Will the Mantle Fall? A biblical and legal guide to succession planning is a must-read for you. It delves into the scriptural and legal aspect of succession planning, characteristics of successors, the people, the process, church bylaws, common myths, even issues with nepotism. Where Will the Mantle Fall? Written by Richmond's own attorney, Pastor Travell Travis, and available at Amazon.com.